Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles. We're thrilled to have you join our community of love, heartache, and life's twists and turns. Your subscription means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more captivating tales and stories. Today we have two emotional stories for you. First one is from a girl who was cheated on by her boyfriend and her best friend.
I'm sorry to hear that I had to go through such a difficult situation. It sounds like I was faced with a challenging and painful betrayal by both my boyfriend Max and my best friend Amy. It was a couple of years ago when this happened, and I was 28 years old at the time. Max and I had been dating for 5 years, and we were fully committed to each other. We lived together, shared finances, had 2 dogs, and were deeply involved in each other's lives. My best friend Amy, who was the same age as me, lived just 10 minutes away, so we spent a lot of time together. We were pretty much the 3 musketeers. One day, while scrolling through Instagram, I came across a picture posted on our local bar's page. In the background of that picture was Max. He was supposed to be at work, and I had never had any reason not to trust him, so I initially assumed it was an older picture. We frequented that bar a couple of times a month, after all. However, when Max got home that day, he was wearing the same blue button-up shirt and jeans from the photo. A horrible feeling gnawed at my stomach, but I didn't say anything that night. Instead, I went through his phone, which, yes, I know is an invasion of privacy, but we had always shared passwords and never had any issues with using each other's phones. In his messages, I found a conversation with someone named Jack. We didn't know anyone named Jack, so I decided to read through the messages, and my heart shattered. I had known Amy since we were in diapers, and I was familiar with how she texted. I double-checked the number just to be sure, and there was no denying it. They were talking behind my back, and it wasn't just innocent conversation. There were explicit pictures and mentions of intimate activities they had engaged in. I spent that night crying and sending myself all the screenshots and evidence I could find. By the morning, I realized that I couldn't just confront them impulsively. I needed to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a painful confrontation. So, I started setting aside money, making up excuses like our fridge being broken and needing to use some of our savings to fix it or requiring a plumber or handyman for various made-up issues. It took me 2 months of carefully orchestrating these lies to have a reason to pull money out of our shared account, which we both had access to. Discovering that both my boyfriend Max and my best friend Amy were betraying my trust was an incredibly tough and emotionally charged experience. It left me feeling devastated and overwhelmed. After finding out about their betrayal, I decided to take steps to protect myself and gather my thoughts. I managed to pull together enough money to put a deposit on a new apartment that was closer to my work and pet-friendly. Slowly, I began moving my belongings there while Max was at work. I told him I was doing some spring cleaning to clear out clutter as a cover. But I couldn't just let them have their secret rendezvous without consequences. No, I decided to mess with their heads in a big way. I started dropping hints about each other that I knew would stir up drama. For instance, I told Max that Amy had talked about a cute guy from work, and I mentioned to Amy that Max had brought up the topic of marriage and kids with me. This last piece of information would hit her especially hard, given that she's infertile due to a childhood illness. I know it may sound petty, but I felt like I needed to level the playing field. The day before I left, I put my plan into motion. I knew where Amy went for lunch most days of the week, so I watched and waited. When she arrived, I put on a facade and pretended like I didn't want to throttle her for breaking my trust and my heart. We sat down and chatted, and slowly, I started dropping hints about the intimate details Max and I shared in their messages. I could see her reaction change from trying to act caring and understanding to blushing furiously, her cheeks turning redder by the minute. It was a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness to watch her react this way. Looking back, I realized that she'd exhibited possessive behavior toward Max before. She'd insist on watching late-night movies with us or ask to sleep on our couch instead of going home, even getting mad when I denied her, thinking she was just being clingy or lonely. Now, it all made sense. She wanted to make sure we weren't having intimate moments. I was in a state of emotional turmoil, and I decided to confront Max about what I had discovered. Later that day, when I saw Max at home, I pretended everything was normal. I snuggled up to him while he watched TV, trying to act as if nothing had changed. After about 20 minutes, I straddled him and asked how his day was, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy. Then, I brought up the encounter with Amy I had earlier. I told Max that I had run into Amy during lunch, and I added, "You'll never guess who she was with." I went on to explain how Amy was with Dave, her real-life coworker who had hung out with us on multiple occasions, and how they were now dating. Max froze when I said this, muttering something about not knowing she was seeing someone. I couldn't resist adding more fuel to the fire. I told him about how I had caught Amy and Dave kissing, and how Amy had shared the details of their intimate life with me, describing it as amazing. I even mentioned that Dave was the first guy to truly satisfy her, relieving her of the need to fake it with previous partners. I had never seen Max look so dejected before. That night, I suggested we have a phone-free evening, something we had done often to enjoy each other's company without distractions. He seemed hesitant but eventually turned off his phone and placed it in the basket we used for such nights. We watched a movie and cuddled on the couch, but Max remained tense throughout the evening, eventually falling asleep on the couch. Once he was asleep, I seized the opportunity. I grabbed his work phone and sent a contact list-wide email, claiming that I might be in a bad mood for the next couple of weeks because my mistress had given me a certain infection. Then, I changed the passcode on his work phone and turned it off, knowing he wouldn't turn it on until he reached his work site, which was 40 minutes away. In addition to leaving, I couldn't resist indulging in some petty actions. I unscrewed most of the light bulbs, removed the batteries from the remote control, unplugged the router to cut off Wi-Fi access, and cranked up the AC to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Once I had left, I sent Amy a text asking her how my taco deluxe tasted, and then I blocked them both. To add a final touch, I posted screenshots of their conversations on my Facebook and let everyone know about the betrayal. It was a mix of emotions, including anger and hurt, that fueled my actions that day. After I moved out, Max's mom surprised me by reaching out to have a conversation. She's an incredible woman who managed to raise her son on her own while building a highly successful company. She expressed her disappointment and shame in her son for his actions. It was quite unexpected, and I could tell that she was deeply affected by the situation. To make matters even more surprising, it seemed that she had changed her will. Initially, Max was supposed to take over the family business, which had been commonly accepted within his family. However, his brother ended up taking over the company instead, and I heard that Max received only the minimum dollar amount. It was clear that Max's cheating had hurt him in ways I couldn't have imagined, especially since he had always talked about running the company and making his mother proud. As for my ex-neighbor Martha, she had always been one to stir up drama. I had informed her about my decision to move out and the reasons behind it a week before I left. I did this so she would keep me updated on the aftermath of everything. Shortly after I left, Amy moved into our old place, and due to the thin walls of our duplex, Martha couldn't help but overhear their constant fights. It seemed like they were unable to trust each other, which was hardly surprising given the circumstances. Amy was often yelling about Max having intimate moments with me and insisted on getting all new furniture because she couldn't stand the thought of sitting on anything we had been on. On top of that, she was incredibly messy and didn't know how to clean, do laundry, or cook. Max, on the other hand, had always been a neat freak who believed that everything should have its place. Living together was clearly a recipe for disaster for them. Martha couldn't resist adding more fuel to the fire by telling Amy that Max's non-existent sister was coming over frequently now that I was gone. Of course, Max doesn't actually have a sister, but that lie resulted in an all-out screaming match between them. Amy was furious that Max had cheated on her, while Max lashed out, calling her the biggest mistake he ever made. The situation seemed like it was spiraling out of control, and I couldn't help but feel like their relationship had been irreparably damaged. When Amy reacted so strongly to my statement about wanting Max back, things escalated quickly. She began throwing things at him, and in response, he called the police. Given Amy's history of fights at bars and clubs, it was no surprise that the police didn't take the situation lightly. When the officers arrived, they detained Amy and had her sit on the curb in front of the duplex. That's when my ever-curious ex-neighbor Martha came out to see what was happening. She ended up giving a statement to the police about what she had witnessed and heard. As the officers were putting Amy in the back of the squad car, Martha couldn't resist one final jab. She shouted to Amy, "Don't worry, darling. I'm sure Max's sister will come over to clean the house." I have to say, I love Martha's sense of humor, and her comment must have hit Amy hard. Amy, however, didn't take it well and started trying to run at Max, which resulted in her getting tossed and placed in the back of the squad car. Max attempted to stop her from interfering, but Martha wasn't about to be deterred. She just smiled and returned to her house, seemingly satisfied with the chaos she had caused. Amy was released a few days later after making bail, but she only went back to the duplex a couple of times, both times with police escorts. It seems likely that Max had taken out an order of protection against her, given the circumstances. Since then, Max has made multiple Facebook pages to try to message me and apologize, but I promptly blocked each one. He even called my workplace, but luckily, I work remotely, and I had informed my supervisors not to disclose any information about me or my contact details. I don't have any close family or siblings for him to reach out to, so I figured that if he wanted to contact me, he would have to do it through my job. I'm not entirely sure what happened with his work emails, but I can only imagine the explaining he had to do to his bosses, coworkers, and business connections. It's a small satisfaction in this messy situation. As for Amy, I've heard that she has moved to a new state and has distanced herself from our old friend group, likely because of the way they reacted to her actions. Thinking about Amy still breaks my heart. We had been friends for as long as I could remember, and she was my anchor during some of the toughest times in my life. When my parents passed away, she helped me see a way past the grief and depression, coaxing me back into wanting to live life again. She taught me to focus on the good memories and not let the bad ones overshadow them. Reading their messages was like a dagger through the heart. I could see how their conversations had evolved, the happiness they shared in keeping their affair a secret from me. That night, as I read those messages, it felt like my ribs were burning, and my stomach was in knots. But I knew I had to think logically rather than let my emotions consume me. The real breakdown came when I arrived at my new apartment. I sat on the floor of the kitchen and cried for what felt like hours. It took me a couple of weeks to slowly unpack and find a new rhythm in my life. My dogs, Juno and Meatloaf, were a source of comfort during this time. They were a bit anxious about the move and not having Max with them, but they adapted, and today they're happy and thriving, especially now that we're in a place with a dog park. This was all 4-ish years ago, and while I've moved on with my life, it's left some scars. I started therapy 6 months after moving out, and it has helped a lot. but I still haven't been able to enter into a trusting relationship since then. The thought of another long-term partner triggers anxiety and trust issues for me. As for the satisfaction of Max and Amy facing the consequences of their actions, it's undeniable. They couldn't get angry without admitting their guilt, and it's a source of satisfaction for me.
Let's get into the second story for the day, where a wife of 23 years cheats on her husband. I'll jump straight into it and say it beforehand, oh yes, I did, but not intentionally. We had been married for 23 years, together for 26. She was my everything. I loved this woman and would have gone through hell and back for her. But she chose to have an affair. My ex had an affair with her psychologist, and when I found out, she had absolutely no remorse, none, zero. I spent the next 3 months in total depression, not able to understand what happened. There was no sign of marital discord. We had just gotten back from what I thought was a nice trip to California to visit some relatives. That's when I found out about her cheating ways through texts she was sending right in front of me. Anyways, while in this deep depression, I did everything I could to try to make it work with her. I felt the need to keep trying, but she was not having any of it. Looking back on it now, it's a great thing. She went on to tell our daughter, I'm moving on to be happy. You guys are all grown and moving out, it's time for me to think about my own luck. Before she went on her way, she told our daughter, he's going to have a hard time getting over me, he'll surely lose his job, and I have no doubts he will become an alcoholic. And she was almost right. It took me 3 months of that deep depression, which included contemplating self-deletion, taking stress leave from work, and drinking myself to sleep and drinking as soon as I woke up. I'm not proud of this. I was not in a good place at all. I'm not at all saying I was a perfect husband. I don't think there is one out there, but I cared about her deeply and made sure she had everything a wife could want. However, during those 3 months, I started to see a therapist, stopped drinking, stopped having the bad thoughts, and finally got my butt back to work. And this is where the unintentional revenge enters. During those 3 months, my ex-wife and I did communicate, and when I realized there was no reconciling this marriage anymore, we talked about what our plans were going forward. So, there I was, in the midst of sorting out the details of our separation with my ex-wife. She had moved out to live with her sister, and her initial plan had been to move on and find happiness while she thought I would spiral into depression, lose my job, and become an alcoholic. Little did she know, life had some surprises in store. Before this meeting with my ex, someone from my past, someone I had been close to marrying back in 1992, re-entered my life after 29 years apart. This reconnection happened through Facebook Messenger. She had friended me around the time I started going back to work, and I couldn't help but wonder if she had been keeping an eye on my Facebook page, which didn't have particularly high security settings. She lived close to the same city I frequented for camping trips, so we decided to meet for a quick dinner before I had to head back to what used to be my home. Surprisingly, it felt like we had never missed a beat, and the spark between us was still very much alive. During dinner, we made plans for me to return early before heading back up to camp. As I returned home, I couldn't help but reflect on how my life had taken a turn I had never expected. My ex had moved on, as she had claimed she would, and I was moving forward too, but in a way that I hadn't anticipated. Life had a funny way of surprising us, and I was eager to see where this new chapter would lead. As we finished discussing the separation agreement, my ex-wife asked me if I was still planning on moving back home. I answered honestly and said, no, not really. Her confusion was evident as she asked, why not? This was the moment that brought me a sense of satisfaction. Sheepishly, I admitted, I kind of met someone. Her face displayed an absolute look of confusion, and the pressure built up until she couldn't hold back any longer. She asked, what do you mean you met someone? You just returned to work. Where did you meet this person? I explained that this person had friended me on Facebook, and we had been talking on Messenger. I mentioned that she lived close to the city where I go camping, and we had a great time together. I shared that I was planning to go back early to spend time with her. My ex was aware of this person and the history I had with her before I met my ex. She had always been insecure about her, even though we had hardly had any contact over the 29 years besides a few friendly emails inquiring about how I was doing, where I was working, and how the kids were doing. This was before the days of texting and social media. You could visibly see the wheels spinning in my ex-wife's head, and the pressure was mounting until she blurted out what was on her mind. She asked her first question, "Did you know this person before?" I answered, "Yes." She asked her second question, "Do I know this person?" I replied, "Yes, you do." But before I could continue, she exclaimed, "No. Is it Miss Lovejoy?" I confirmed that it was indeed Miss Lovejoy. At that moment, something unexpected happened. From a person who had shown absolutely no remorse for her actions, the waterworks started flowing from her eyes, and she couldn't stop crying. Frantically, she said, "I'm not crying because you're with that woman, I'm crying because of what I did to you." I had my doubts about her sincerity but chose not to voice them. Shortly after, she left, and I later learned that she went back to her sister's place, which was about 500 yards away from our house. She couldn't stop crying. Her sister, who had been somewhat on my side throughout this ordeal but had to support her sister, asked why she was crying. Her words were a stark reminder of the choices she had made. You didn't want him anymore, you didn't want him to try to save the marriage, you didn't want him bringing you flowers. I remember vividly the moments when I told my ex-wife that I didn't want her to send me cards, letters, or texts. I had resisted going to a marriage counselor, despite her suggestion. I was clear that I didn't want her coming by the house or asking me to go for a walk. I wanted her to leave me alone so that I could move on and be happy. It seemed like she got exactly what she had wanted, which was our separation. So when I found out later that evening that she had been found passed out on her sister's deck in her nightwear, with vomit in one of the planters, it was both surprising and perplexing. Today, a year and a half later, I'm still with my new love, and life has been wonderful. We've shared countless experiences together and have exciting plans for the future. As for my ex-wife, I don't know where she is, and honestly, I don't care. I genuinely hope she finds the happiness she believes she couldn't have with me, but I know that I'm experiencing that happiness now. In a funny turn of events, my ex-wife texted me, saying that everyone she had talked to believed that I had been with Miss Lovejoy before she cheated on me, I just hadn't been caught. It was ironic, because I had told her the same thing when I confronted her about her infidelity, knowing the truth, but allowing her to believe what she wanted. So, to answer the question directly, yes, I sought revenge on my cheating wife of 23 years, and it did make me feel better at the time. However, I've since moved on and am enjoying life to the fullest. Dear listener, if you have reached this far, please click on the subscribe button. It will be a great help.